They say a priest should listen, chide, not speak. But some sins are too heavy to stay buried. I carried their secrets, their crimes, their guilt, until one truth refused to stay silent. I told what I shouldn't have then, not to betray, but to save. And now, the same men who came to me for forgiveness
sit in the court, demanding my punishment.
They say a priest should listen, not speak, but some sins are too heavy to stay buried. I carried their secrets, their crimes, their guilt, until one truth refused to stay silent. I told what I shouldn't have, not to betray, but to save. And now, the same men who came to me for forgiveness sit in the court, demanding my punishment. My name is Father Michael Donnelly, and for 40 years I served St. Augustine's Parish in the heart of Brookfield, Massachusetts. I was 65 when my world collapsed, not because I lost my faith, but because I finally found my courage. It started on a cold February evening. The confessional booth smelled of old wood and incense, the way it always had. I'd heard thousands of confessions in that small, dark space. Adultery, theft, lies, the usual sins of ordinary people seeking ordinary forgiveness. But that night, the voice on the other side of the screen wasn't ordinary at all. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." I recognized him immediately. Marcus Holloway, city councilman, respected businessman, married father of 3. His voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. "Go on, my son," I said gently. I've done something terrible, something I can't take back." I waited. In the confessional, silence is a tool. People fill it with truth when they're ready. "There was an accident," he whispered. 3 weeks ago, I was driving home from a fundraiser. I'd had a few drinks, not many, but enough. It was dark and the roads were icy. My heart began to race. I knew where this was going. A girl was crossing the street, a teenager. I didn't see her until it was too late. I hit her, Father. I hit her and I drove away. The air left my lungs. "She died," he continued, his voice breaking. "They found her the next morning. The police think it was a hit and run, but they have no leads, no witnesses, and I've said nothing." For a moment I couldn't speak. I gripped the armrest of my seat, my mind reeling. Emma Rodriguez, 16 years old. I'd attended her funeral. I'd held her mother as she wept over the casket. "Marcus," I said slowly, "you need to go to the police." "I can't." His voice rose with panic. "My career, my family, everything will be destroyed." "A family has already been destroyed," I said firmly. "Emma's mother deserves to know the truth. This isn't something confession can absolve without action. You must make this right. I came here for forgiveness, not a lecture. And I'm telling you what God requires. Repentance. Real repentance. Not just words in the dark." He stood abruptly. I heard the confessional door slam, and then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wooden screen that separated confessor from penitent. The seal of confession was sacred, absolute. I had taken vows to never reveal what I heard in that booth, no matter what. But a girl was dead, and her killer walked free. That night I didn't sleep. I paced my small rectory, praying for guidance. I knew the law. I knew the church's position. Breaking the seal of confession was grounds for immediate excommunication. It was unthinkable. But so was letting Emma's mother suffer in ignorance while her daughter's killer sat in council meetings, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. By morning, I had made my decision. I called Detective Sarah Chen, who had been investigating Emma's death. My hands shook as I dialed. My voice cracked as I spoke. "Detective, I have information about the Rodriguez case. I can't tell you how I know. But you need to look into Marcus Holloway. Check his car for damage. Check his movements that night." There was a pause. "Father Donnelly, are you certain about this?" I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I hung up before she could ask more questions, and in that moment I knew. I had just ended my life as I knew it. The next 72 hours moved like a slow-motion avalanche. Detective Chen must have acted quickly on my tip. By Wednesday morning, police had obtained a warrant to examine Marcus Holloway's car. They found traces of impact-consistent paint transfer, microscopic evidence that matched Emma's jacket. By Wednesday afternoon, Marcus was arrested. By Wednesday evening, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I didn't answer. I sat in my study, staring at the cross on the wall, waiting for the consequences I knew were coming. They arrived Thursday morning in the form of Bishop Richard Walsh. He didn't knock. He simply walked into my rectory, his face carved from stone, and placed a manila folder on my desk. "Tell me you didn't do what I think you did," he said quietly. I looked up at him. We'd known each other for 30 years. He'd ordained me. He'd been a friend. "I did what was necessary," I replied. "You broke the seal of confession." His voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder would make it more real. "Do you understand what that means? A girl is dead, Richard. Her mother deserves justice, and a sacred sacrament is now compromised." His composure cracked. "For 2,000 years, the Church has protected the seal of confession. It's inviolable, absolute. You know this. I also know that we're called to serve justice, not hide it. This isn't about justice. It's about law, canon law, civil law. The Constitution itself protects clergy confidentiality. You've violated every principle we stand for." I stood slowly. Emma Rodriguez was 16 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She had a scholarship waiting. And Marcus Holloway took that from her because he was too drunk and too cowardly to face what he'd done. "That's not your decision to make. Then whose is it?" My voice rose. "God's? Because I prayed, Richard. I prayed all night, and every prayer led me to the same answer. Silence is complicity." Bishop Walsh closed his eyes. "You'll be excommunicated. You know that." "I know. You'll face legal charges. Marcus's lawyers are already filing motions to suppress the evidence. They're arguing illegal search based on privileged information." "Let them." "Michael," his voice softened, "you're throwing away everything. Your priesthood, your reputation. For what?" I looked him in the eye. "For the truth." He shook his head slowly, picked up his folder, and walked to the door. He paused there, his back to me. "I'm sorry, Michael, I truly am, but I have to do what the Church requires." "I understand." He left without another word. "I know this is heavy, but I need to ask you something. This happened in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets like this could tear a community apart. What town do you think this could be? Maybe you've lived in a place like this. Drop the name in the comments. By Friday, the media had the story. Priest breaks confessional seal in murder case. Church versus conscience, the Father Donnelly controversy. Sacred silence shattered. Priest faces excommunication. The parish erupted in division. Some parishioners supported me. They organized prayer vigils. They wrote letters to the bishop. They stood outside St. Augustine's with signs reading, "Justice for Emma." But others called me a traitor, a heretic, a man who had destroyed the one place people could speak freely, without fear. Mrs. O'Brien, who had attended my masses for 20 years, spat at my feet outside the grocery store. "How can anyone trust a priest again?" she hissed. "You've ruined confession for everyone, mister." Chen, who had confessed his gambling addiction to me years ago, crossed the street when he saw me coming, and young Father Timothy, who I'd mentored since his ordination, wouldn't meet my eyes. The loneliest part wasn't the anger. It was the fear in their faces. They looked at me and saw someone who had broken an unbreakable rule. And if I could break that rule, what else might I break? I understood their fear. I even sympathized with it. But I couldn't regret what I'd done. Because across town, in a modest home filled with grief, Maria Rodriguez finally had an answer. Her daughter's killer had a name. And for the first time since Emma's death, she could begin to heal. The formal charges came on a grey Monday morning in March. Not from the church, that would come later, but from Marcus Holloway's legal team. I was named as a witness in the criminal case. But Marcus's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Brennan, filed an immediate motion to exclude all evidence derived from my tip to Detective Chen. The argument was simple. Priest-penitent privilege is protected by law. I had violated that privilege. Therefore, any evidence obtained through my information was fruit of the poisonous tree, inadmissible in court. If the judge agreed, Marcus would walk free. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for April 15th. I had 6 weeks to prepare for something I'd never imagined, testifying not as a character witness or spiritual counselor, but as the accused. The prosecution called me 3 times. Assistant District Attorney James Morrison was a young man with kind eyes and an exhausted face. "Father Donnelly, I need you to understand the situation," he said during our first meeting. "Victoria Brennan is arguing that your disclosure was illegal. If the judge agrees, we lose not just the car evidence, but the entire case trajectory. Marcus's lawyers will claim investigative bias." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "The truth. Why did you do it? What made you break a vow you've held for 40 years? I told him about Emma's funeral, about holding Maria Rodriguez as she collapsed beside her daughter's casket, about the nightmares I'd had since, visions of Emma crossing that dark street, alone, while her killer drove away. "And you're sure it was Holloway who confessed?" "I can't testify to that," I said carefully. "The seal still binds me in some ways." Morrison rubbed his temples. "Then how do we prove you had legitimate cause to act?" "I had moral cause," I said. "Legal cause, that's for the judge to decide." The attacks intensified. Marcus's team leaked details to the press. Suddenly, I wasn't Father Michael Donnelly, beloved parish priest. I was the priest who violated confession. My photo appeared on news websites beside words like breach of trust and religious controversy. Editorials debated my actions. Legal experts argued on talk shows. Some defended me. Clergy aren't above the law. Others condemned me. This destroys the foundation of faith. The church's official statement came on March 28th. It was brief, clinical, devastating. "Father Michael Donnelly has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation into violations of canon law. The sanctity of the sacrament of confession is fundamental to Catholic faith and practice." Translation: I was being hung out to dry. But something unexpected happened. Maria Rodriguez called a press conference. She stood on the courthouse steps, her hands trembling, her voice steady. "My daughter was murdered. For 3 weeks I lived in agony, not knowing who had taken her from me. Father Donnelly gave me that answer. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for money. He did it because he knew what was right." Her voice broke. "People say he violated the seal of confession, but what about the man who violated my daughter's life? What about his sin? Why is everyone protecting him and attacking the one person who had the courage to speak?" She looked directly into the cameras. "I don't know much about church law, but I know about justice, and I know that Father Donnelly is the only one who tried to give my family any." The clip went viral. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just about religious law anymore. It was about morality, about what we owe to the dead and the grieving. Support poured in from unexpected places. Victims' rights groups, legal reform advocates, even some clergy members privately expressed support, though few did so publicly. Father James Corrigan, a retired priest from Vermont, wrote an editorial in the Boston Globe. "We are called to be shepherds, not shields for wolves. If the seal of confession becomes a hiding place for evil, then we have failed Christ's command to love our neighbors." The church's response was swift. Father Corrigan was formally reprimanded, but the seed was planted. People were asking questions the church didn't want to answer, and Marcus Holloway's trial was still ahead. April 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth. I dressed in my clerical collar, perhaps for the last time, and drove to the Brookfield County Courthouse. The building was surrounded by news vans. Protesters lined both sides of the entrance. Some held signs supporting me, others condemned me. "Priests should protect confession. Justice for Emma. Donnelly is a traitor." Truth above tradition. I walked between them, keeping my eyes forward, my hands steady. Inside, the courtroom was packed. I saw Maria Rodriguez in the front row, clutching a photo of Emma. I saw members of my parish, their faces reflecting the same division as the protesters outside. And I saw Marcus Holloway. He sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his expression carefully neutral. When our eyes met, something flickered across his face. Rage, maybe, or fear, perhaps both. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided. She was in her 60s, grey-haired, with a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for theatrics. "We're here," she began, "to determine the admissibility of evidence in the case of Commonwealth versus Marcus Holloway. Specifically, whether evidence obtained following a disclosure by Father Michael Donnelly violates priest-penitent privilege and should be excluded." Victoria Brennan stood. "Your Honor, the defense moves to suppress all evidence derived from Father Donnelly's unauthorized disclosure. Massachusetts law clearly protects clergy communicant privilege. My client's confession, if such a confession occurred, was made in the context of a sacred religious rite. Father Donnelly's violation of that confidence taints the entire investigation." Judge Hendricks nodded. "Mr. Morrison?" The ADA stood. "Your Honor, while we respect religious privilege, we argue that it's not absolute. Father Donnelly acted not as a priest protecting confession, but as a citizen with knowledge of a crime. The privilege exists to protect spiritual counseling, not to shield criminal conduct. A dangerous precedent," Brennan countered. "If we allow priests to break confession whenever they deem it necessary, the sacrament becomes meaningless. Who would ever confess again? Who would want a system where priests protect killers?" Morrison shot back. "Enough." Judge Hendricks raised her hand. "I want to hear from Father Donnelly himself. Father, please take the stand." My legs felt weak as I crossed the courtroom. The witness stand seemed both too high and too exposed. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" The irony wasn't lost on me. "I do." Morrison approached first. "Father Donnelly, how long have you served as a priest?" 40 years. "And in those 40 years, how many confessions would you estimate you've heard?" "Thousands. Tens of thousands, perhaps. Have you ever broken the seal of confession before?" "Never." "Why did you do it this time?" I took a breath. "Because a 16-year-old girl was dead, and her killer was walking free. Because I knew that silence in this case meant complicity. Because I believe that God calls us to justice, not just ritual." "Did you identify the person who confessed to you?" I paused. This was the knife's edge. I provided information that led to an investigation. "I did not directly name anyone." "But you knew who it was?" "Yes." Morrison nodded. "Thank you, Father." Victoria Brennan stood for cross-examination. She moved like a predator circling prey. "Father Donnelly, you've been a priest for 40 years. You took vows, sacred vows, correct?" "Yes." "And those vows include maintaining the seal of confession under all circumstances, correct?" "That is the traditional understanding." "Not traditional, absolute. Canon Law 983 states, the sacramental seal is inviolable. Therefore it is absolutely forbidden for a confessor to betray in any way a penitent in words or in any manner and for any reason. Are you familiar with this law?" "I am." "And yet you violated it." "I acted according to my conscience." "Your conscience?" She laughed sharply. "Father, you're not a lone moral agent. You're a representative of the Catholic Church. You don't get to pick and choose which rules apply based on your feelings. I didn't act on feelings. I acted on conviction. Conviction that you know better than 2,000 years of church teaching? Conviction that justice matters more than secrets." She smiled coldly. No further questions. The hearing continued for 3 days. Expert witnesses testified on both sides. A Catholic theologian argued that the seal of confession was non-negotiable, that even the Pope couldn't authorize its breach. A legal scholar countered that religious privileges weren't absolute. They could be overridden by compelling state interests, like solving a murder, Priests from across Massachusetts submitted letters to the court. Some supported the church's position, others, quietly, supported mine. Father Thomas Mackenzie, a prison chaplain from Springfield, wrote, "I have heard confessions from murderers, rapists, and thieves. I have kept their secrets as the seal requires, but if one of them confessed to a crime that could be prevented, or a victim who could still be saved, I pray I would have Father Donnelly's courage." The church immediately reassigned him. On the third day, Judge Hendricks called for closing arguments. Victoria Brennan went first. She was eloquent and forceful. "Your Honor, this case isn't about whether Marcus Holloway is guilty. It's about whether our society will protect fundamental rights. Priest-penitent privilege exists for a reason. People must be able to speak freely to their spiritual counselors without fear of legal repercussions. If we allow Father Donnelly's actions to stand, we destroy that protection forever. Imagine a world where no confession is safe, where priests become informants, where the most private moments of spiritual struggle can be weaponized in court. That's the world we create if we don't suppress this evidence. Father Donnelly may have meant well, but good intentions don't override constitutional protections. The evidence must be excluded." She sat down to approving nods from Marcus's supporters. Morrison stood for the prosecution. "Your Honor, opposing counsel wants you to believe this is about protecting religious freedom. It's not. It's about protecting a killer." Emma Rodriguez was 16 years old. She was crossing the street in her own neighborhood when Marcus Holloway, driving drunk, struck her and left her to die. He didn't call 911. He didn't stop to help. He went home, hid his damaged car, and let Emma bleed out on cold pavement. For 3 weeks he lived his normal life. Council meetings, family dinners, church on Sunday, all while Emma's mother suffered, not knowing who had killed her daughter. Father Donnelly didn't break confession lightly. He agonized over it. He prayed. He weighed his vows against his conscience. And ultimately he decided that protecting a killer wasn't what God, or justice, required. The defense wants to make this about religious freedom. But what about Emma's freedom? Her freedom to live? Her family's freedom to know the truth? We're not asking the court to abolish priest-penitent privilege. We're asking you to recognize that it's not a license to shield crimes. Father Donnelly didn't act as a priest in this case. He acted as a human being who couldn't stay silent in the face of evil. The evidence should stand, and Marcus Holloway should face justice. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Judge Hendricks looked at both attorneys, then at me, then at Maria Rodriguez. "I'll issue my ruling in 1 week," she said. "Court is adjourned. And those 7 days were the longest of my life. I couldn't return to St. Augustine's. The parish had assigned Father Timothy to take over my duties. I wasn't forbidden from entering, but the message was clear. I was no longer welcome. I stayed in my rectory, which now felt like a prison. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, supporters, critics. I stopped answering. One evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Maria Rodriguez standing there, holding a casserole dish. "Father," she said softly, "I thought you might be hungry." I invited her in. We sat in my small kitchen, eating her chicken enchiladas in near silence. Finally she spoke. "They're going to rule against you, aren't they?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Even if they do," she said, "even if that man walks free, you did the right thing. You gave me something no one else could. The truth. And I'll never forget that." Tears blurred my vision. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more. You did everything." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You gave up everything. For my daughter. For me." After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty casserole dish. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Whatever the judge decided, I had done what I believed was right. April 29th, 10 a.m. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. News of the hearing had spread nationally. This wasn't just a local case anymore. It was a test case, a precedent that could reshape the boundaries of religious privilege. I sat behind the prosecution table, my hands folded in my lap. I had dressed in civilian clothes, slacks and a button-down shirt. The collar felt like it belonged to someone else now. Maria Rodriguez sat beside me. She had asked to be present, and Morrison had allowed it. Marcus Holloway sat across the aisle, his expensive legal team arrayed around him like armor. Judge Hendricks entered. We all stood. "Please be seated," she said, settling into her chair. She opened a folder, adjusted her glasses, and began. "This has been one of the most challenging cases of my career. It requires balancing fundamental principles that often conflict: religious freedom, the right to counsel, the pursuit of justice, and the obligation to protect public safety. I've reviewed the arguments, the precedents, and the applicable law. I've also spent considerable time reflecting on the moral dimensions of this case, though I recognize that my role is to interpret law, not philosophy. The question before me is narrow. Should evidence obtained following Father Donnelly's disclosure be suppressed as a violation of priest-penitent privilege? My heart hammered in my chest. The defense argues that Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 233, Section 20A, provides absolute privilege for communications made to clergy in their professional capacity. They cite Commonwealth versus Rashid, which upheld this privilege even in criminal cases. The prosecution argues that Father Donnelly acted as a citizen, not a priest, and that compelling state interest overrides religious privilege in cases involving serious crimes. Both arguments have merit. She paused. The courtroom held its breath. However, I find the prosecution's argument more persuasive in this specific instance. Father Donnelly's disclosure was not casual gossip. It was a carefully considered act by a man who had maintained confidentiality for 40 years. He did not testify directly about the confession. He provided information that led to an independent investigation, which then produced physical evidence. More importantly, the privilege exists to protect spiritual counseling, not to create sanctuary for criminal conduct. If we interpret the privilege so broadly that it shields all admissions of crime, we create an incentive for offenders to manipulate religious institutions for legal protection. That cannot be the intent of the law. Therefore, I rule that the evidence obtained through the investigation initiated by Father Donnelly's tip is admissible. The motion to suppress is denied. The courtroom erupted. Maria Rodriguez sobbed into her hands. Supporters cheered. Marcus's face went pale. Victoria Brennan shot to her feet. "Your Honor, we intend to appeal immediately." "That is your right, Counselor. But in this court, the evidence stands. The trial will proceed." Judge Hendricks banged her gavel. "We're adjourned." I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. "Father Donnelly, how do you feel about the ruling? Do you regret breaking confession? What will you do if the church excommunicates you?" I raised my hand, and slowly the crowd quieted. "I feel," I said carefully, "that justice has taken a step forward. This was never about me. It was about Emma Rodriguez and the truth she deserved. I'm grateful that truth will now have its day in court." "What about your priesthood?" I smiled sadly. "My relationship with God doesn't depend on a title. If the church decides I can no longer serve as a priest, I'll accept that, but I won't apologize for what I did." "Do you think other priests should break confession if they hear about crimes?" "I think," I said slowly, "that every priest must answer to their own conscience and their own God. I can't speak for others. I can only tell you that when I prayed for guidance, the answer I received was clear. Silence would have been sin." Maria Rodriguez appeared beside me. She took my arm. "That's enough questions," she said firmly. "This man has been through enough." The reporters parted, and she walked me toward the exit. Outside, the spring sun was warm on my face. "What happens now?" I asked her. She smiled through her tears. "Now we watch justice happen, together." And for the first time in months, I believed it would. The trial of Marcus Holloway began on May 20th. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the physical evidence: paint transfer from Marcus's Mercedes that matched Emma's jacket, Security footage from a gas station showing his car with front-end damage the morning after the accident. Cell phone records placing him in Emma's neighborhood at the time of the hit and run. They called witnesses. A bartender who testified that Marcus had consumed at least 4 whiskeys the night of the incident. A mechanic who said Marcus had called him repeatedly in the days after Emma's death, asking about body shops that work off the books. They called Detective Chen, who described receiving my tip and the subsequent investigation. And they called me. Morrison approached the witness stand with gentle eyes. "Father Donnelly, can you describe your relationship with the Rodriguez family?" "I've known Maria Rodriguez for about 8 years. Emma used to help with our youth group. She was a bright, kind girl who loved animals. She wanted to be a veterinarian." "Did you attend her funeral?" "I did. I presided over it. Several jurors wiped their eyes. After that funeral, did something happen that led you to contact Detective Chen?" I took a breath. This was it. Yes, I received information that convinced me I knew who had killed Emma. I struggled with what to do. I prayed. I consulted my conscience. And ultimately I decided that justice for Emma and her family outweighed my obligation to silence. "Did you directly reveal the contents of a confession?" "No. I provided information that led to an investigation. I believed then, and I believe now, that this was the right choice." Victoria Brennan's cross-examination was brutal. "Father Donnelly, you've admitted to violating the seal of confession, correct?" "I've admitted to acting on information I received in a pastoral context, yes." "Information received in confession." "I won't answer that directly, because the seal still binds you. How convenient. You break it when it suits you and hide behind it when it doesn't." Morrison objected. Judge Hendricks sustained it, but the damage was done. Brennan was painting me as a hypocrite, someone who couldn't be trusted. "Father Donnelly, do you believe you're above the law?" "No. Above church law. I believe there are moments when conscience must override protocol." "So you do think you're above the law? You think your personal judgment trumps centuries of religious tradition?" "I think Emma Rodriguez deserved justice more than Marcus Holloway deserved protection." The courtroom fell silent. Brennan stared at me. No further questions. The defense's case was thinner than I expected. Marcus didn't testify. Too risky. Instead, Brennan called character witnesses, business associates who praised his integrity, church members who described him as devoted and charitable. One witness made my stomach turn. Father Timothy, my former protege. "Father Timothy," Brennan asked, "you worked closely with Father Donnelly, correct?" "Yes. He was my mentor." "Did you ever observe him struggling with the seal of confession?" Timothy hesitated. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He took it very seriously, but toward the end he seemed troubled, distant. "Did he ever suggest to you that some confessions were too difficult to keep?" "He said once that the weight of what we hear can be crushing, that sometimes silence feels like complicity." "So he questioned the seal of confession even before this incident?" "Objection," Morrison said. "Speculation. Sustained." But again, the seed was planted. Brennan was suggesting I'd been unreliable, that my breaking confession wasn't a one-time moral decision, but a pattern of instability. When Father Timothy stepped down, he wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't blame him. He was protecting himself and the church, but it still hurt. Closing arguments came on June 3rd. Brennan argued that the entire case was tainted by my illegal disclosure, that Marcus was a victim of a rogue priest and an overzealous prosecution. Morrison argued that the evidence spoke for itself. Marcus Holloway had killed Emma Rodriguez and tried to hide it. "The defense wants you to focus on how we learned the truth," Morrison said. "But the truth remains, Emma is dead, and the man responsible is sitting right there. Father Donnelly's actions didn't manufacture evidence. They revealed it, and justice demands we act on that revelation." The jury deliberated for 2 days. On June 5th, they returned. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Holloway, guilty of vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident." Maria Rodriguez collapsed in sobs. and I finally exhaled. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the interim, the media circus only intensified. Legal analysts debated the verdict. Religious scholars argued about the precedent it set. Some hailed it as a victory for justice. Others warned it would destroy the sacrament of confession forever. The Church finally issued its formal decree. On June 15th, I received a certified letter from the Archdiocese of Boston. Inside was a document bearing the official seal and signature of Cardinal Francis O'Malley. Reverend Michael Donnelly. After thorough investigation and consultation with the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, it has been determined that your actions constitute a grave violation of Canon Law 983 and Canon Law 1388. By revealing information obtained through the sacrament of penance, you have committed an act that incurs automatic excommunication latae sententiae. Effective immediately, you are no longer permitted to celebrate the sacraments, present yourself as a priest of the Catholic Church, participate in any liturgical functions. You are formally excommunicated from the Catholic Church until such time as you seek reconciliation through proper canonical channels. May God have mercy on your soul. I read it 3 times. Each time the words felt heavier. 40 years of service. Thousands of masses celebrated. Countless people counseled, baptized, married, buried, gone, erased by a single decision. I sat in my rectory, soon to be someone else's rectory, and wept, not for the title, not for the collar, but for the loss of the identity I'd carried since I was 25 years old. Who was I, if not Father Donnelly? That night, I knelt before the small crucifix in my bedroom and prayed. Not the formal prayers I'd said for decades, just honest, broken words. God, I don't know if I did the right thing. The Church says I didn't. Half the world says I didn't. But Emma is dead and her killer has been found. If that's wrong, I don't know how to serve you anymore. I waited for an answer, for a sign, for anything. What came wasn't dramatic. No voice from heaven, no vision, just a quiet, steady peace, and the certainty that I would do the same thing again. June 28th, Marcus Holloway's sentencing. Judge Hendricks looked down at him from the bench. Mr. Holloway, you've been found guilty of vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement? Marcus stood. His expensive suit couldn't hide the broken man inside. His voice cracked. I am so sorry. To Emma's family, to this community. I was a coward. I was selfish. I took a beautiful young life and then tried to hide from what I'd done. He turned toward Maria Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez, I know nothing I say will bring Emma back, but I want you to know that I will carry this guilt for the rest of my life. I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry. Maria stood. For a moment, I thought she might scream at him. Instead, her voice was quiet and steady. You took my daughter from me. You left her alone on that street to die. And then you went home to your family while I buried mine. She paused, tears streaming down her face. I will never forgive you. But I'm grateful that the truth finally came out. That's all I have to say. Judge Hendricks nodded. Mr. Holloway, you showed a complete disregard for human life, not once, but twice. First, when you drove drunk and struck Emma Rodriguez. And second, when you made the conscious choice to flee, leaving a dying child on the road. The court recognizes your remorse, but remorse does not undo death. The guidelines suggest 8 to 15 years. However, given the aggravating circumstances of your flight and subsequent cover-up, I sentence you to the maximum, 15 years in state prison, followed by 10 years of probation. Additionally, your driver's license is permanently revoked and you are ordered to pay restitution to the Rodriguez family in the amount of $250,000. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none to offer. The gavel came down. Marcus Holloway was led away in handcuffs. Maria Rodriguez turned to me and we embraced. She sobbed against my shoulder while reporters' cameras flashed. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving her justice. She deserved nothing less, I replied. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. Father Donnelly, or should we call you Mr. Donnelly now? How does it feel to see Marcus Holloway sentenced? I considered the question. I feel relief. Relief that Emma's family has closure. Relief that justice was served. Do you regret your excommunication? I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret my choice. Some things are more important than titles. Will you appeal the excommunication? I shook my head. No. The Church has made its position clear. I respect that, even if I disagree with it. I acted according to my conscience, and I'll live with the consequences. What will you do now? I smiled sadly. I honestly don't know, but I trust that God has a plan, even if I can't see it yet. One more question, a young reporter pushed forward. Do you still consider yourself a priest? I paused. The crowd quieted, waiting for my answer. I was ordained 40 years ago. That ordination marked my soul in a way the Church says can never be erased. They can take away my authority to perform sacraments. They can remove my collar and my title, but they can't remove my calling to serve God and serve truth. So yes, in my heart, I'm still a priest, just not the kind the Church recognizes anymore. The next morning, I packed my belongings from the rectory. 40 years of life fit into surprisingly few boxes. Books, mostly, a few photographs, some personal items. Father Timothy came to help. We worked in awkward silence until finally he spoke. I'm sorry, Michael, for what I said on the stand. You told the truth as you saw it, I said. I don't fault you for that. Still, you were my mentor, my friend. And you protected yourself and the Church, I understand. Truly, he set down the box he was holding. Do you think you did the right thing? I looked at him. Do you think I did the wrong thing? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know. The seal of confession is sacred, but so is justice. I don't know how to reconcile those things. Neither do I admitted. But I had to choose, and I chose the living over the dead, truth over silence. If that makes me a bad priest, so be it. He helped me carry the boxes to my car. We shook hands on the steps of St. Augustine's. Where will you go? He asked. I have a friend in Vermont. I'll stay with him while I figure things out. Will you ever come back? I looked up at the church where I'd served for 2 decades. I don't know, but this place will always be part of me. I drove away without looking back. 3 months later, I was living in a small apartment in Burlington, Vermont. My friend, Father James Corrigan, the retired priest who defended me in the Boston Globe, had helped me find work at a community center. I taught GED classes and helped run a food bank. It wasn't the priesthood, but it was service. And service, I'd learned, was what mattered most. The church had moved on. St. Augustine's had a new pastor. Father Timothy was doing well by all accounts. The controversy had faded from the headlines, but the questions hadn't faded. I received letters almost daily. Some were hateful, calling me a traitor, a heretic, a wolf in shepherd's clothing. Others were supportive, thanking me for my courage, telling me their own stories of injustice hidden behind religious walls. One letter stood out. It came from a woman in Ohio named Catherine Walsh. She wrote, Dear Father Donnelly, I'm a victim of sexual abuse by a priest when I was 14 years old. For years, I told no one. When I finally found the courage to report it, the church protected him, transferred him to another parish, kept it quiet. He's still a priest. I'm still broken. I watched your trial. I read about your excommunication, and I thought, here is a priest who finally chose victims over institutions, who chose truth over silence. You gave me hope that not all clergy are complicit, that some of you actually believe in the values you preach. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to do what so many others won't. Sincerely, Catherine. I sat with that letter for hours. I thought about all the priests who'd heard confessions of abuse from perpetrators or victims and stayed silent, who'd followed the rules while children suffered. I thought about the institution I'd served for 40 years and the ways it had failed its most vulnerable members, and I realized my excommunication wasn't a punishment. It was a liberation. In September, I received an unexpected phone call. Mr. Donnelly, This is Professor Rebecca Mills from Boston College School of Theology. I'm calling to invite you to speak at our symposium on clergy ethics and the limits of confidentiality. I was stunned. I'm excommunicated. I'm not exactly a representative of Catholic teaching anymore, which is precisely why we want you, she said. You've lived through a situation most theologians only theorize about. Your perspective is invaluable. The symposium was held in late October. The auditorium was packed with theology students, professors, and clergy from various denominations. I stood at the podium, looking out at their expectant faces. I'm not here to tell you what to do, I began. I can't give you a formula for when to break confidence and when to keep it. What I can tell you is this. For 40 years, I believed that following the rules was the same as doing right. I believed that the institution knew better than I did, that obedience was virtue. And then I was faced with a choice where all the rules pointed one direction and my conscience pointed another. I chose conscience, and I lost everything I'd built my life around. But I gained something more important, the knowledge that I'd acted with integrity, that when it mattered most, I chose truth over comfort, justice over silence, the living over the institution. Some of you will face similar choices in your ministry, moments when the rules and your conscience collide. I can't tell you what to choose, but I can tell you this. Whatever you choose, you'll have to live with it. Make sure you choose something you can live with, because titles and positions come and go, but your integrity, that's forever. The applause was thunderous. Afterwards, dozens of students approached me with questions. Several clergy members quietly thanked me. One young priest confessed he'd been struggling with something similar, knowledge of financial fraud in his parish. What should I do? He asked. I can't answer that for you, I said, but ask yourself, what would you want someone to do if you were the victim? He nodded slowly. I think I know. That night, lying in my small Vermont apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. I might not be a priest anymore, but I was still called to help people find their way through darkness, and maybe that was priesthood enough. A year later, Maria Rodriguez called me. Michael, I wanted you to hear this from me first. I've started a foundation, the Emma Rodriguez Justice Fund. We're helping families of hit-and-run victims navigate the legal system, and we're also pushing for legislation to create exceptions to clergy privilege in cases of serious crimes. Maria, that's incredible. It's because of you. What you did, it didn't just give me justice. It started a conversation that needed to happen. You changed things. After we hung up, I walked to the small chapel at the community center. It wasn't a Catholic church. It was non-denominational, simple, but it was holy in its own way. I knelt before the plain wooden cross and prayed. Not the prayers of my priesthood, just honest words. God, I don't know if I did everything right, but I tried to do what was right. If that's enough, thank you. If it's not, help me do better. As I sat there in the silence, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about Emma Rodriguez, whose death had catalyzed this entire journey. I thought about Marcus Holloway sitting in prison, perhaps finally confronting his guilt. I thought about Maria Rodriguez, turning her grief into purpose. I thought about the students and clergy I'd spoken to, who were wrestling with their own conscience. And I thought about the church, the institution I'd loved and served, the institution that had cast me out. I didn't hate them for it. I understood their position. The seal of confession is foundational. Breaking it creates chaos, uncertainty, fear. But I also understood my position. Some truths are too important to bury. So what's the lesson in all of this? What can you take from my story? First, institutions are human creations. They serve important purposes, providing structure, preserving wisdom, creating community, but they're not infallible. When an institution demands your silence in the face of injustice, it's no longer serving its stated purpose. It's serving itself. Don't let any organization, religious, professional, or otherwise, convince you that protecting its reputation matters more than protecting the vulnerable. Second, conscience is the deepest law. Rules and regulations have their place. But there will be moments in your life when the right thing to do conflicts with the rules you've been given. In those moments, you must choose. Will choosing conscience cost you something? Probably. It cost me my priesthood, my community, my identity. But it gave me something irreplaceable, the ability to look at myself in the mirror without shame. Third, truth has consequences, but so does silence. When I stayed silent, I was protecting Marcus Holloway. I was enabling his escape from justice. I was telling Emma's family that their suffering mattered less than religious protocol. Silence is not neutral. It's a choice, and often it's a choice that favors the powerful over the powerless. Finally, you don't need a title to serve truth. I'm no longer Father Donnelly. I can't perform sacraments. I can't wear the collar. I can't represent the church. But I can still help people. I can still teach. I can still stand for justice. My calling didn't come from the church. It came from something deeper, and that calling remains, regardless of my institutional status. If you're watching this, and you're facing a similar choice, if you know something that you've been told to keep secret, if that secret is protecting someone who's caused harm, if your conscience is screaming at you to speak up, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Whatever you choose, choose something you can live with, because you're the one who has to live with it. I lost my priesthood. I lost my community. I lost the identity I'd carried for 40 years, but I didn't lose myself. And when I think about Emma Rodriguez, about her smile, her dreams, her potential, I know I made the right choice. Her life mattered more than my comfort. Her justice mattered more than my career. Her truth mattered more than institutional silence. And if I had to do it again, knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change a thing. This story happened because one man chose conscience over comfort. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between following the rules and doing what was right? What did you choose? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else facing that same impossible decision. Let's keep this conversation going. From the Touching Stories team, thank you for being here with us through Father Michael Donnelly's journey. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the most important voice you'll ever listen to is the one inside your own heart. Don't let anyone silence it. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and keep touching lives.